EVs are coming whether or not you asked for them or earned them. He said there's too much of a price premium, especially at the top end of the EQ lineup, and almost no lease support. The executive said the EVs lack the lust factor of Mercedes gasoline-powered flagship models such as the S-Class sedan and AMG GT Coupe. Our cars need to be want cars, he said. The S-Class has maintained good loyalty because it's aspirational. An EQS is not something that most people aspire to own.
Oh, well, that's quite brutal.
Hello, I'm Drew Smith.
And I'm Joe Simpson.
And welcome to Looking Out, the podcast, auditory sidekick to the newsletter, in which we connect the dots across the automotive industry, mobility, design, and culture.
And coming up in this, episode 10, and our third episode on YouTube, we're going to have a chat about everyone's favourite subject, EVs. Are EVs about to go mainstream, or, as some recent articles are suggesting, are they about to hit the buffers?
It's interesting when you think about just how all in the automotive industry has gone on EV, and it felt like it was happening very, very slowly, and then all at once. And
if you consider where we were 10 years ago, or even
right,
5 years ago, to where we are now.
Absolutely. And if you think about some of the data that we've got here about kind of the market penetration for EVs, it looks, say, in China, for example, like it's an unstoppable force. Like, what is it there? It's like 30% penetration at this point?
Yeah, and I think Europe is kind of around, I think, 15%, but then there's some markets that are way higher. Norway's up in the 80s, Sweden's in the 40s, the UK is kind of, I think, about 18%. But then that contrasts quite starkly with certain places, right, Drew?
Well, so my home country, which, to be honest, in the global scheme of things is a bit of an irrelevance, we've only got 8% penetration in Australia.
Right.
I mean, that's against a backdrop of essentially zero sort of real government subsidies to speed adoption. And the fact that we still don't even have emission standards in Australia. So it's very, very easy for manufacturers to sell low-cost, high-margin vehicles here and get away with it. But what's really surprising is, especially given the sort of the environment around subsidies, is that in the United States, they're still only at 6% penetration in that market.
So that's even worse than Australia, which appears to have no support and, pretty much no network. And as you say, is kind of a bit of a special market in its own right. So what's going on in the US? We can see in recent news that expensive EVs like the Mercedes EQS are sitting on dealer lots for quite a long time. I think it was 84 days is the average time an EQS spends on a Mercedes dealer lot in the US. And then last week we got this quite surprising and strange bit of news, which is a study conducted by S&P Global Mobility, which said that when we look at take electric car owners today on a whole, only just over 50% say they're likely to buy another electric car for their next purchase. Now, if you look at Tesla owners, it's actually over 70%. But considering the way that most markets weigh people or groups like the EU as a group, but we're mandating a change to this. It suggests we've got a little bit of a kind of a challenge or a sort of a little bit of a problem coming. If people who are driving EVs today are saying, well, I'm not sure if I'm going to buy one next time. And I think it's worth unpacking a little bit about what's going on and maybe putting a few of our cards on the table. I'm quite happy to sit here and say I am a huge EV convert. I have had several. I had my first EV in 2016. We currently have 2 EVs on our drive. We don't have an internal combustion engine car. And yet, I'm also one of those people that after my first EV, a BMW i3 in 2016, we, after the lease on that ran out after 2 years, we went back to an internal combustion car. So I'm kind of living proof of someone perhaps that's like the people who are being surveyed in this S&P mobility report.
Well, perhaps I should put my cards on the table and say that I own a V12 powered Mercedes, a V8 powered Mercedes, and a 3-cylinder Volkswagen up. I have not yet been tempted over to the EV side, except when I started throwing around the idea of buying a BMW i3 and, kind of took that off the table here in Australia simply because the purchase price is too high for somebody like me who likes cheap old chod, and also the insurance costs in this country were absolutely enormous. But I think to put that aside, one of the things that I've noticed in Australia and perhaps why we're not seeing the level of adoption in this market that you might expect is actually what you're able to buy from manufacturers is still extremely limited.
Right.
We don't have in this country yet a replacement for, like, direct replacements for what have typically been the most popular sort of vehicle typologies. Yes, Tesla Model 3 and Model Y, as they are in many parts of the world, are the best-selling electric cars here, but they kind of require people to make a bit of a typological jump in what is ultimately quite a conservative market. There's nothing in the pickup space here that's widely available yet. There are thousands of Hiluxes and Ford Rangers and even kind of now Chinese entrants into the pickup space being sold every month, and yet there's not a meaningful EV option. And then if you look at, say, a traditional OEM like Volkswagen, if you want to buy into something like an ID3 or an ID4, you're actually having to make a fairly significant downgrade, I would argue, in terms of the traditional qualities that people associate with the Volkswagen brand when you buy one of these new cars. Because let's be frank, ID3, ID4, they're not super appealing products when assessed on the traditional merits of the Volkswagen brand, be that exterior design, interior design, perceived quality, functionality.
And I think this leads us into the kind of the kind of elephant in the room with electric cars, Drew. One of the reasons we wanted to talk about it on this show was there was a very interesting infographic published by the Visual Capitalist, which talked about the cost of an EV battery and how much of a percentage that was compared to a regular car. And just the quite staggering level. I'm guessing that a lot of people who listen or watch us do work in the industry, so they have some understanding of the purchase price or the sale price that a car kind of goes on the market for versus what it actually costs the OEM to build. And if we look at that today, most car makers don't make a massive profit on the vehicle they sell. Sort of 8% is considered good in the industry. And with an internal combustion engine, when you look at your kind of material bill for that car, it's a really tiny proportion. So then we get to this cost of an EV battery, and we start to see things like, Tesla Model S, which has been around for quite a long time, battery in that car costs about $12,000. It's 13.6% of the vehicle's overall cost. The battery in the upcoming Ram Rev, the electric pickup truck from Stellantis Ram, which is a massive battery, huge battery, 229 kilowatt hours, $25,000 for that battery from LG. It's 31% of that vehicle's overall cost. And even as you say, in the example you gave was the ID4, in the lower size battery version of that, the 62 kilowatt hour battery from Catal, Visual Capitalist reckons $8,730, representing 23% of the vehicle's overall cost. And when I'm saying cost, remember here we're comparing what the battery costs versus what the vehicle sells for.
Right.
So when you look at it more in terms of what it's actually going to cost to build as the OEM,
part of a bill of
the
materials,
batteries a much bigger percentage. And what this is doing in the market is creating some really unusual and I think difficult dynamics. Because as you said, where do you go? You can obviously choose to transfer that extra cost onto the consumer and make the vehicle cost more.
Right.
But we can see, that when you start to climb up 50, 60, 70,000 euros, the amount of people that can afford a new vehicle that costs that much, it does tail off. So if you're passing that bill on, then you're kind of giving somebody, or you're asking someone to pay a lot more for the representative size of vehicle compared to an internal combustion one. So the other option you can take is to try to strip cost out of other parts of the vehicle. And we can see quite clearly with something like the Volkswagen ID3 and ID4, that's exactly what Volkswagen have done.
Well, and I guess the other thing is, if you go down the we'll pass that cost on to the consumer route. How is your average kind of premium car consumer typically going to be buying their car? Well, they're going to be buying it on finance, right? So they're not going to be paying, 60, 70, 80,000 euros up front. Typically, they'll be arranging some kind of finance package to get that car on their driveway. Yet, if you look at sort of finance costs, and these are some figures out of the US, you're looking at anywhere between 12 and 23% interest on a typical auto loan. So 12% if your credit is absolutely squeaky clean, and 23% if you're essentially considered subprime. And those loan terms are running generally for 6+ years. So the cost of borrowing to cover the purchase of a vehicle is extremely high. And coming back to the Mercedes example that you talked about, there's a quote in a piece by Jalopnik from a dealer talking about the EQ models. And they say the EVs are coming whether or not you asked for them or earned them. He said there's too much of a price premium, especially at the top end of the EQ lineup, and almost no lease support. The executive said, and this ties back into the decontenting part of the conversation, the executive said the EVs lack the lust factor of Mercedes gasoline-powered flagship models such as the S-Class sedan and AMG GT Coupe. Our cars need to be want cars, he said. The S-Class has maintained good loyalty because it's aspirational. An EQS is not something that most people aspire to own.
Oh, well, that's quite brutal.
I mean, that's coming from a dealer. But if we think back to, my experience with the EQS SUV a couple of weeks ago, and this coming from somebody who owns a W140 Merc and an R129 Merc, like I was absolutely appalled at what Mercedes were trying to pass off essentially as an S-Class grade vehicle. And I feel for the manufacturers who are trying to walk this line, but I have to imagine that particularly amongst long-term S-Class owners, when they jump out of an S into an EQS, like a lot of this stuff is going to be very readily apparent to them. And as the dealer said, the desirability factor of these vehicles is just not there.
I think there's a kind of and yet to this for me, which is from my perspective, drive an EV, I think in 99 out of 100 circumstances, driving an EV is better. It's quieter, it's smoother, it's more relaxing. Generally, right now, they're faster. There are less things to go wrong, fewer moving parts. And I think there's two kind of big questions that sit around this relative to what you just said about the EQS and quality. One is that as we move to electrified vehicles, I think there's a real opportunity to change the form factor of the car and really start to explore what you can do with a car, and not just how a car looks, but what you can actually do within it. Because there's potentially a lot of freedom with the architecture and with what you can do with the interior room. And I think the other aspect is that I think when you look at the Chinese market, and I think this will become the case probably everywhere, that you fundamentally, when you move to an electric car, you're changing some of the kind of the rules of engagement and the meaning of a car. And right now, the problem is that one of the main sort of values of a car is the freedom to kind of go anywhere, anytime, almost ad infinitum. You stop for a few minutes, you put some fuel in it, and you carry on. And the problem with an EV is that it kind of calls that a bit into question because of the whole charging equation. But I think that will be resolved over time. Faster battery charging, longer ranges, better network. But the more interesting side for me is that when you start to plug a car in, actually the meaning of the car, what benefits it brings, what it should do, start to change. It starts to map mentally more to your phone. If you fundamentally are plugging something into a cord, something in the wall, you start to think about what else could it do? What else should it do? What other things should it integrate within my life? And I'm saying this partly because I don't think we're anywhere there yet. We're right at the start of the curve of how this change in propulsion might change the meaning, role, and sort of, I suppose, abilities that a car can have. I compare it sometimes to almost like we're just in the kind of post-Model T era, if you compare it to internal combustion. And I think when you look at China and some of the Chinese brands and what they're doing, they're really rethinking actually what the car is, how it integrates with other digital parts of society. They're kind of almost like super platforms. And also what kind of things you do in the car, how long you stay in the car, how it is as a space when it's not moving. And some of them are actually starting to kind of reinvent almost like the car based around use cases and quite specific use cases. And so I put that almost forward as an argument for why the electric car is very, very exciting. And I think we've got some key challenges now. I'm not denying that, particularly this one around cost when you throw into it the kind of interest rate rises. But I think there's opportunity there that hasn't yet been really explored, and that maybe as petrol heads and people who enjoy driving, and you said, you know, some of the cars you have, and I have some history of cars similar to that, that it's very easy to dismiss. And I think that's quite, if I'm honest, I think that's a certain age, generally male, generally Western view. And if you talk to some other people in the world, they have a very different view.
So what I find surprising then is, I mean, in some respects, I don't find it surprising because, you know, I've worked in the guts of the industry and I know how sort of, to some extent, how legacy auto works. But that legacy automakers are doing such a terrible job of actually demonstrating these new value propositions to us, because all we've got at the moment is the comparison of an EQS to an S-Class. All we have at the moment is the comparison of an ID3 to a Golf Mark 7, right? And that leaves us as consumers really struggling to understand the real world benefit for a really substantial increase in cost and a really substantial decrease in some cases in terms of, you know, the extent to which I can enjoy that vehicle. I hear you. I do believe we're right at the start, but the lack of imagination, and I can understand why we're in this position. You know, we talked right at the beginning of this show how we've kind of gone from zero to nothing very, very quickly. And I think legacy automakers have very much been caught on the back foot by the transition, and they're just trying to keep up.
Yeah.
But for those European companies, if they don't very quickly start transitioning into, okay, what are the freedoms that EVs enable us from a design and packaging and positioning perspective, and how do we start expressing those freedoms in new ways, in compelling ways? You know, all this talk about kind of China stealing the lead, it's only going to become ever more entrenched.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is something that many people are aware of, that legacy OEMs are set up to make a thing, as we've said in a few shows now, plop out of a factory at the end of a process. And thinking about an ecosystem and thinking about how you integrate into an ecosystem and make your product more valuable, make it more, a term I don't like, but sticky. So it's actually kind of, you know, it actually becomes more useful again. And actually does things like, not just, you know, it can save you time, it can save you money, it can kind of make something that's easier to share and to use to others, but it actually can also bring you kind of joy or give you kind of access to things that maybe will be shut off to internal combustion engine vehicles over time. That's valuable, and I think automakers or legacy automakers are not very well positioned to sort of work on that and pull that together as a kind of experience ecosystem. So that's one part, and what goes with it is, you know, we came into this based on cost. I will caveat this by saying your mileage may vary. I think we have to, if EVs are really going to take off, you have to start looking at total cost of ownership and not just upfront price. It is way, way cheaper here, and with the circumstance I have in Sweden, to have an EV. I was putting about 2,000 SEK, that's about 160 euros of fuel, into my last internal combustion car I had here. The last bill I got for charging for like the same period of time was just under 500 SEK. Now, that's a set of circumstances that are potentially a bit unique to me or potentially specific to Sweden. I would say that they are, you know, I know the cost of electricity's gone up, but it's still broadly day to day. If you can charge at home or you can charge at work, the total cost of ownership in terms of running that vehicle is going to offset over time some of the initial purchase cost. And theoretically, at least, with less mechanical moving parts, there's less to go wrong in an EV. So right. In terms of maintenance, again, potentially different story. But right now, I think what you're holding up, I will totally agree with. The automakers are not really set up to kind of help consumers really make sense of and gain from this. You know, at a basic level, a lot of them are still just charging the same price for servicing an EV and servicing an EV as regularly as an internal combustion engine car. It simply doesn't need as much stuff doing to it as regularly. So
Sure.
why are you charging the same service prices?
Why are you charging the same service prices? It's about how effectively the industry is able to communicate those benefits, to shift people out of a way of thinking that we've been inheriting for kind of 120 years. Like
Right.
the infrastructure and the mental models are so well established at this point. One of the things that we talked about was how at the Munich show the Chinese showed up.
Yeah.
I mean, even Tesla showed up at the Munich show, which is unheard of, on the home territory of the German industry. And sometimes we can think about threats as being rather abstract. In that circumstance, the threat was no longer abstract. It's right there. It's right there in front of you. And I can imagine that if you were at that show and you were walking from, say, NIO's stand to Volkswagen's stand, as an executive at Volkswagen, it would have put in very sharp relief.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of media report that the last Shanghai show, I think was earlier this year, was the first one that many auto execs had gone back to China after COVID, 3 years away. And it was almost like that behind closed doors, the Chinese had, ran and made hay while the sun was shining. And then many Western auto execs had gone back in and had just a, oh, fuck moment with, what the Chinese are doing is impressive. But it's worth saying in the context of this conversation, one of the reasons they're now trying to go or pushing so hard into Europe is there's oversupply in the Chinese market. The Chinese market is slowing, stagnating. They have interest rates, rises as well. So they need to find an outlet for that production that they've now kind of geared up. And so many of those Chinese brands are already kind of wholly electric brands.
What's your take on how the used market, whether you have a point of view on it at all, but I'll put it out there, like how the used market is developing? Because there's stories of Tesla, for example, withholding huge numbers of vehicles from the secondary market on lots in order to try and keep the retained values up. And yet when you look at data from the US market, the depreciation curve on them is absolutely enormous.
Yeah. It's a very tricky one to answer because I'm not an expert in this. What I know is that, right now, the depreciation curves look, I fancy a Porsche Taycan in a couple of years if those depreciation curves continue as they're projected to.
So long as the battery pack's been replaced.
But that's the thing.
Haven't they?
I think there's a thing about, and this wraps, the last part of the conversation wraps into this. How do you kind of control that? Because really, you need to kind of take some ownership of the second and third owner, or you want to, because what you want to do, I guess, is give people the peace of mind that the battery pack isn't, shot. Now, I think it's fairly common knowledge. What we're seeing with effectively 10 years of EVs on the road is that actually the battery packs are degrading at a rate which is much slower than people might think and might project. Teslas with 500,000 miles on them still have over 70% of the original capacity. Well, most cars are only designed to last for a couple of 100,000 miles. So if you're able to still have, I guess as a second or the third owner, you'd be expecting the battery still to have 95%, 98% maybe of its original, capacity. I was looking at 5-year-old i3s again, actually, the other day, and you can get reports on them, and they were all at 99, 100% of original capacity. So
Wow.
I think there's not actually necessarily a problem there. I think there's a thing about reassuring consumers that it's like it's not going to fail or that it's not going to just deliver poor range. I think that's one big part of it.
And I guess, I mean, at least from my understanding, and you may know better than I, there's currently no sort of standardized reporting across manufacturers, like there is for fuel economy, right? When you buy a new car, there's, I mean, whether you believe the figures or not, there is at least kind of a standardized reporting across manufacturers and across products that allow you to make an assessment of the fuel efficiency of the vehicle. And of course, we do have that in terms of energy efficiency of EVs.
Yeah.
But when the battery is such a significant component when it comes to considering the ongoing longevity of an EV, it feels like there needs to be some standardized way of being able to understand how much life is left. With an internal combustion engine, you'd put it up on the stand, you'd take a look at the oil, you'd look at wear and tear on the suspension component. Like you'd look at the service history.
Yeah.
We don't currently have a way of, or an easy way and an easily comparable way of doing that with EVs.
As I understand it, with most EVs, it's fairly easy if you've got the right diagnostics and software to plug in and get a battery health check report. And I have started to see that more. But if I was a dealer trying to sell these things, I think that's would be the thing I would be trying to hold up, and I'd be trying to check. So I think once we get that, there will probably be a sort of stabilization of the used market. But I think the bigger thing is, and it goes back to the kind of, early days of EV, Henry Ford Model T point. I think the way that the average consumer thinks about it right now is we are at this early phase. So if I buy one now, in 3-4 years time, that is going to be very outdated technology, is the perception. Or I will be able to buy a car maybe for the same price as let's say I spend $40,000 now. In 3 years' time, I'll be able to spend $40,000, and I'd be able to get a car with much greater range. That might be true. There are I think there are advances coming. Toyota announced this week that it thought it had managed to productionize solid-state batteries. There's a move in some parts of the industry towards LFPs, for Tesla using LFPs, which are much cheaper. But I wonder, what's sufficient range? I know that the cars I have now are totally sufficient to me, and I drove one of them across Europe from Sweden to the UK last year, and it was fine. Yeah, sure, I planned it. I know what I'm doing. I'm in the industry. But I'm not looking for a car that offers double that range. I just don't need it. That would just be hauling a massive, huge, heavy battery pack around most of the time that I don't need. But right now, it's a confidence for consumers. We're still we're not even an early majority, I would say, of how much range do I need and can it cover my edge cases? And that's not just going to be the battery technology that covers that. That's going to be the charging network. And I think a lot of people are starting to say, it's not that we have a range anxiety problem now, it's that we have a charge anxiety problem. And particularly in the US, I think that's where we're seeing the problem. The network is so flaky, uptime is so poor that is probably what is driving much of the hesitation among people. I don't necessarily think it's the battery technology per se.
There's another slant on this that kind of popped up in my mind as we were preparing for this show. So I'm a bit of a fan of Cal Newport. If you haven't heard of Cal Newport, he writes on the topics of deep work and deep living, and he's even written a book called A World Without Email, which sounds like fucking Valhalla to me. It would just be heaven. But he talks about sort of this philosophy of techno-materialism and this idea that we have, as consumers, become so used to buying something simply because the specification looks better, right? I've just bought an iPhone 15 Pro Max because it has a 5 times optical zoom. Now, in the back of my mind, I made a justification for that, okay, as somebody interested in photography, it would be interesting to have a phone with 5 times. I mean, I just bought the best because that's what somebody in my position has the privilege of being able to do. I bought a long range EV because it allows me to go further than I could reasonably need to. We've kind of bought into this idea that, well, the next best thing must be better for us, therefore I should have it.
I mean, it's a fundamental of consumerism, right? I've gone from a TV that started at like 22 inch, 30 inch, 40 inch, now at 60 or 70 inch, and it was 4K and now it's 8K, and it's like basically a kind of more is better argument. And then at the same time with technology, we've had Moore's law, where broadly, kind of the power, the storage space, whatever, was kind of, sort of doubling kind of with every sort of incremental step of time. So we expected things to improve over time as well.
Well, but I guess the interesting thing that Cal posits is that quite often we buy these new pieces of technology, which, the very nature that they have progressed in their capabilities and capacities tells us, we think, that we should be more satisfied to own them. And yet, in many cases, we actually wind up somewhat disillusioned. I've gone from an iPhone 10 to the iPhone 15 that I'm recording on. And frankly, I hate it as a device. I really hate it. It's so big and it's so ugly. And yes, it has a 5 times zoom. But for 99.95% of the things that I use my phone for, and I'm increasingly trying to do less with it, it is a categorically worse device. It's interesting if you look at sort of review aggregation for iPhone, it peaked in terms of the number of 4 and 5 star reviews. It actually peaked at iPhone 12, and with every successive generation of iPhone, that's gone down, and iPhone 15 is the lowest. What's interesting, I think, about so Cal puts on one side techno-materialism. He then suggests techno-humanism as the counterpoint, and this is where he's careful about the term, or suggests caution, because it is a term that is used by the transhumanists as well, which is a whole other ball game that I don't want to get into right now. But it's this idea that rather than prioritizing the material gains of the technology that we buy and use, how do we shift to a mindset of understanding sort of how they improve the human experience,
right?
That we have. And this is where it gets really interesting, to come back to your point, circling all the way back to how the Chinese are rethinking use cases.
Yeah.
So, and how we use a car and what it actually means, and what role does it play in our life? What role does it play more broadly in culture? And, if I think about the Lee Mega, which, the photos of which have been coming out, that feels like it could be, the start of a radical reimagining of what a car means and how it brings people together and taps into this idea of third space. Now, of course, there are going to be heaps of people who are like, well, it's still a privately owned vehicle and it's fundamentally an extremely selfish and resource intensive thing. No argument from me.
No.
Like absolutely no argument from me. And you could therefore argue that, okay, well, we're starting at the wrong starting place in terms of thinking about what a car should be. But still, it seems to me that there's evidence of, oh, what if this thing was about human experience rather than simply just more is more for the sake of more?
This is a bit what I'm trying to get at. I've been a bit provocative tonight in terms of some of the things I've said.
Really?
I'm
What?
not. I'm not necessarily into the idea of like car as hyper connected, always on, sort of device on wheels, shall we say? And while you were talking, I was reminded of the Dacia Manifesto concept, which we saw last year at the Paris Auto Show.
Oh, the cute little sort of off-roady thing with sleeping
Yeah,
bags for seats.
off-roading thing,
Yep.
quite skeletal, quite, well, very minimal. And I think this is what excites me about electric cars. There's a world of possibility and range of possibilities that sit within them. And the Dacia was one extent, which was actually, it said, what do you need? It said, actually, you don't even necessarily need doors. It said you definitely don't need tons of screens, and, you know, let's not even get into the whole kind of like the impact of electronics on the environment. But, you know, it was a kind of, you bring your own screen. It was a kind of car as almost like outdoor shelter. And it was also sort of in that context, it was about where has the car actually taken us culturally, has allowed us to discover as people, as humankind, to go places that we've not been before. And where do you want to go? And rather than kind of going off the beaten track as a way of sort of conquering and destroying the world, actually treading really lightly and quietly. And then maybe when you get there, having this thing that's actually a resource for you. So it can power things. It can keep you alive. I know that Ford and Tesla and people have all kind of held up this sort of, I mean, Ford do it quite actively with the F-150 Lightning, of the car as kind of power bank. So in the sort of scenario of a power cut, you can feed power from the car to power your home. And an F-150 Lightning can power it for 3 days. Now, I'm talking about extreme sort of scenarios here, but I do think that it's fascinating that actually we're talking about the ability of a vehicle to allow us to think about, you know, what role does it play in the world? And you said, you know, the Lee Mega as a kind of, you said, yeah, but it's still a private car, still something that is, you know, fundamentally it's for kind of a very elite top proportion of society. And yeah, absolutely. And at one level, it'll be like cars are always going to be bad. Own cars are kind of a problem. But while they're going to be here, what about if we thought about making them as useful as possible? What if we thought about making them as things that were resources? What about if they became covered in solar panels, so when they're sat still, which they are most of the time, they're actually collecting energy, or the immense amount of storage power that is there in the battery can be used to connect and balance the grid so that we don't have to build new power stations, and that's a reality, or that the immense amount of computing power could be hooked up and when they're plugged in, potentially used for projects that weren't just about them driving, but it was, you know, the sort of like wider computing power projects and things that we need computing power for in the world. It's about starting to make the car something that can give something back socially, perhaps as a slight penance for all the damage it's done to the world, socially and environmentally.
That's why we're here, isn't it, Joe? To talk about all of that stuff. You know, thinking about the car as a force for good or indeed evil, we had intended to talk about the Cybertruck on this show. But looking at the clock, we've made it to 50 minutes. And, you know, I think we should probably give ourselves a bit of a break and leave you, dear listeners and viewers, hanging. Because it's fair to say that, you know, there's a lot to be said on the topic of the Cybertruck, and I think it's really interesting to sit it against a lot of what we've been talking about in this show. As always, it's been a pleasure to have you with us. If you like the show, please forward it on, leave us a review, drop us an email. We had some really lovely emails from you after the last show on the Century, and the nature of criticism. And it was just so awesome for us to read those and to see how we're connecting with you. So thank you very much for that.
Absolutely. And for those of you we haven't got back to, we have read the emails. We will get back to you. I'm sorry, I've been slightly kind of overwhelmed.
You've been thinking about the Cybertruck, Joe. For more about the topics in this show, obviously, if you're on YouTube, we'll pop some links in the space below the video, or you can take a look at our website, lookingout.io, where we'll also have the links that we've been talking about in this show. Looking Out, the podcast, was written and presented by Drew Smith
and Joe Simpson.
This is Drew Smith, and thank you for listening and watching. Like, fucking hell, Drew. What?
Don't worry about your bags. At least your eyes appear to open properly rather than you having eyelids that appear to be having their own stroke. You know?
Oh, dear.